Hello. I believe by now we all know that every country in Africa has been colonized except for two other countries that were not colonized in Africa. And we know those countries. We know one is Liberia, and then we also know about Ethiopia. These two countries have not been colonized in Africa. Now, why I'm coming up with this issue is was colonization an advantage to those countries that were colonized in Africa compared to those that were not colonized? The reason I'm asking this is because these two countries seems to be set back a lot, especially if we talk about Ethiopia. Now, Ethiopia was never colonized. It was never colonized by any country in Africa. But if we look at what is happening in Ethiopia, it's very devastating. Ethiopia is characterized with poverty, hunger, famine. You can just mention them. Now, I'm going to add a video to this one for you to see what is happening in Ethiopia. It's really bad. Now, does it mean that the our colonizers have set foundations for for the countries that have been colonized to progress? A typical example of countries that have been well established is South Africa. If you look at South Africa, the colonized masters or the colonizers have developed the country to the state that, in fact, when the blacks took over, it was easy for them to run the country and administer everything successfully. But then, does it mean that the black men cannot be able to do the same? Because Ethiopia has never been colonized, nothing seems to be going on well. No jobs, hunger, famine, high level of poverty in the country. So, does it mean that the system of colonization was far better? I don't know. Just something. This issue of how do you call it? Of Ethiopia is quite worrying, and nobody seems to be concerned so far as Africa is concerned. Nobody seems to be worried. But people are dying. People are very hungry in Ethiopia, and everybody is just looking aloof without any form of concern. And this worries me a lot. But then we knew that they were not colonized, but do we know the reasons why they were not colonized? You know. Now, one of the reasons why they were not colonized was because of their geographical location, because they played their location was not viable for the whites to settle in there. That was one of the reasons why they were not, you know, colonized. There was no economic viability in Ethiopia and Liberia at that time. Even though in Liberia, America was the one that found Liberia, they found Liberia then in 1821, despite they were the one, uh, they never took over Liberia to rule them. So eventually they were not colonized. I want to watch this video and see what is happening in Ethiopia, how hunger, famine has deteriorated the entire country to the essence that it's devastating. Just watch this from here. Thank you.
That report from Jamal Osman. Now, the World Food Programme is one of the main providers of food in countries suffering famine and acute hunger. Its chief economist, Dr. Arif Hussein, joins me now from Rome. Dr. Hussein, I wanted to get your reaction first to what you've just seen in Jamal's report there.
I mean, you know, it's terrible, and unfortunately, that's the reality of this world right now. Whether you're talking about East Africa, whether you're talking about West Africa, whether you're talking about Southern Africa, whether you're talking about Middle East, and essentially what you're seeing is that there are like 4 C's, if I can put it that way, in play. First and foremost, you have conflict. You're showing Ethiopia. Conflict is a big deal over there. The second one is climate crises. You're seeing it time and again. Again, what you showed, it is about climate, it is about droughts. The third one is about consequences of COVID itself, the economic consequences. and then fourth one is the rising costs. What we are seeing is that in many, many parts of the world, all of these things are culminating into a perfect storm,
right,
which is creating situations like Ethiopia.
And so talk about that perfect storm. You name-checked several countries there. Give us a sense of the scale of how many people around the world are facing the prospect of famine.
So this is before Ukraine. We have about 276 million people in 81 countries who are in what we call a hunger crisis, of which about 44 million people are in what we call hunger emergencies, meaning one step away from famine. And it's not in like one or two countries, we're talking dozens of countries. I mean, I can name you, you start from Yemen to Syria to Sudan to South Sudan to Ethiopia to Afghanistan to Central African Republic and I can keep going on and on and on. And that's what's happening right now.
And when you hear those figures, which are shocking figures, how far short is the World Food Programme of the money that it needs? And what is your call to the wealthy nations about, how they need to step up?
So we are about, if in 2022, we need to assist about 145 million people. That's about 50% of the big numbers that I talked about. And in order to do that, we need about $20 billion. Right now, our forecasts show that we would have just about 10 billion. So we have a 50% gap in terms of what we need and what we think we will get. And that gap has severe consequences around the world in many, many countries where we have to cut very basic rations left, right, and center. I mean, that's what is happening as we speak. And the Ukraine war has just put fuel on this raging fire.
And so put it in stark terms, if wealthy nations don't add that extra $10 billion, what are the implications in terms of people's lives?
Look, there are two things. One is what happens inside the countries. You will see children die, you will see men die, you will see women die. We have barely kept people alive through COVID. Don't forget, these things don't happen in a vacuum. So we were already dealing with COVID and its consequences, and people are kind of like squeezed out because of COVID and rising prices before Ukraine, right? So there is no safety nets left for many millions of people around the world.
Yeah.
And when you don't have safety nets left, what are the choices? Either starve where you are, or migrate, or displace, and go to someplace else. And that is also, the time when you start to see destabilization of countries, you start to see destabilization of regions, and you see an increase in terrorism. People become more radicalized.
Dr. Arif Hussain, thank you very much for joining us. Well, a short while ago, I spoke to Conservative MP Tom Tugendhat, who's chair of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee. I began by asking whether the West is in danger of forgetting the plight of millions of people in Africa.
Well, the warning from David Beasley, the head of the World Food Programme, has been extremely clear over many weeks now, which is that not only is Ukraine a disaster area in itself, but as it grows about 10%, maybe a bit more, of the world's wheat, corn, and various other foods, this has huge knock-on effects for places in sub-Saharan Africa and the Middle East.
Well, the World Food Programme says it just doesn't have the money that it needs to bluntly feed the children of Ukraine and the children of Ethiopia, for example. So do wealthy nations have to redouble the amount they're giving to the World Food Programme as a matter of urgency?
Well, I think we've got to look very carefully at the requests coming out of the office of the chief exec of the World Food Programme, the director of the World Food Programme, because the warnings he's making are extremely clear. And what he's stating quite categorically is that the implications are not just in Ukraine and the number of people who now need emergency aid who didn't only 4 weeks ago, quite a remarkable act of brutality by Putin's regime. But also the food that they're looking to buy on the international markets that would feed people in places like Lebanon and Sudan and Libya is now even more expensive than it was.
So in that context, when you think about your own government's breach of its manifesto commitment to spend 0.7% of gross national income on international aid. I know that you didn't support that decision, but does the government need to rethink that manifesto breach as a matter of urgency?
Well, I long believed that the importance of the commitment is not the percentage, but the effect. And the reality is that it's quite clear today that the effect we're likely to see if we don't support those who are in the greatest need is one that undermines the stability of the British people. It doesn't just lead to famine around the world, which is horrific in itself, but it also leads to the consequent horrors of human trafficking and people movement. And we need to be absolutely clear that what we have an interest in is stable societies who are able to see their own prosperity grow.
From where you're sitting, if you stand back and you look at the crises in Ukraine, you know, we've talked a lot about Afghanistan, and we're talking now about famine in parts of Ethiopia. Is there a sense that political leaders around the world, particularly in the West, can't sort of manage all of those crises all at one time?
Well, I'm afraid you don't get a choice. I mean, the reality is you've got to be able to walk and chew gum. And if you're the leader of a major global economy today, you just need to deal with as much of it as you can. Now, I think the challenges are severe. That's true, but they are ones that we can cope with if we deal with them together.
Tom Tugendhat, thanks very much.
Thank you.